I think Saudi promotion of Wahhabism is absolutely a problem. So says Robert Ford, former US ambassador to Syria, about factors driving ISIL recruitment, suggesting we would be unable to defeat the global jihadist movement based largely on Wahhabism, which is the state-sponsored religion of Saudi Arabia, without somehow enlisting the support of the Saudi royal family in withdrawing its financial support from Wahhabism. He's not alone. At a congressional hearing in January 2016, Democratic Congressman Hank Johnson said the ideology of ISIL lines up with Wahhabism. There's a clear link here. Takfiri terrorists kill Muslims who don't conform to their ideology. Takfirism is largely influenced by Wahhabism, the radical ideology dominating Saudi Arabia and freely practiced by Saudi clerics. The spread of such foreign-backed extremist groups, especially in Iraq, Syria and North Africa, has led to conflict, crimes and the displacement of millions, plus the loss of hundreds of thousands of civilian lives. How should we regard America's support for a state that sponsors ISIL's ideology? How much to blame is the US for ISIL recruitment? And why hasn't Washington taken action against Saudi Arabia's own ideology, one shared with ISIL in nearly a century? These are the simple questions we sought to answer. Now, a US congressional hearing discussed billions of dollars worth of weapons and ammunitions America has sold to Saudi Arabia. These have been used to kill thousands of Yemeni civilians. What would you have asked at that hearing? That's what we put to the American public.
Why are we giving the money to Saudi Arabia?
That's a tough question. I'm unaware of the hearing. So, I mean, honestly, I can't really answer that because I wasn't really aware of any of that information, to be honest.
What could we have done with this money if it had been invested domestically in health, education, and infrastructure?
Why are you spending this much money for what you're spending it for? Why?
How much money was spent on other forms of diplomacy other than maybe some of the weapons?
I think I will have asked, how are they finding out if this help is really helping the people of Arabia Saudita and the region, or if it is hurting? I mean, how are they making sure that the guns and the weapons that they are sending there or selling to Saudi Arabia are using in the right way?
Why were you sending the money, and where are the weapons going for? What is the purpose of the weapons that are being sent there?
What's the need for all the weapons? Like, why do you need so many weapons? What's going on that there are so many weapons being sold?
I would be asking for peace. That's one more important. Money comes and go, and definitely peaceful relationship between the Arabs definitely would lead to a different success.
I'd probably ask for safeguards, especially with those ammunition and weaponry not being used to obviously slaughter innocents. So I'd have more rigorous safeguards. I'd ask what safeguards are in place to prevent and limit that atrocities and stuff.
We asked our experts to tell us what their questions would be at the hearing into US sale of armaments to Saudi Arabia.
Well, the US Senator has reminded the US government that the Leahy law prohibits the US security contribution to any state that violates gross human rights abuses. So in the case of Yemen, for example, we can see that the civilian infrastructure has been totally destroyed. There have been, and these are reports by the Yemeni Civilian Association, that over 250 mosques have been destroyed, over 600 hospitals, over 800 schools have all been destroyed. So we can see that there's, with this cooperation of providing ammunition, there's been this, result.
Well, a big question comes in here because the United States always shouts that it is concerned with the human rights and concerned with the democracy, and in fact invaded two countries to change their regimes because of that. But now it's helping Saudi Arabia with the weapons, and Saudi Arabia is destroying Yemen completely. And there are some advisors, American advisors, in there now, and this is absolute contradiction to what the United States preaches.
US Democrat Congressman Hank Johnson says the US cannot defeat ISIL as long as Saudi Arabia sponsors the cult of Wahhabism. How unhappy are the public that the US still supports a regime sponsoring ISIL's ideology?
It's, it's such a complicated situation over there. And I just, it hurts me to see all the violence that occurs.
Well, I have mixed feelings about it. U.S. geopolitics with Saudi Arabia are complicated. We're dependent on foreign oil. So on one hand, I wouldn't want the U.S. economy to collapse if it were to lose access to the oil from Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, I think there are probably solutions that we could find domestically to allow us to not be dependent on Saudi foreign oil, and therefore allow us to have a more human rights-based perspective towards our foreign policy with that country.
This country is now ruled by those who have money, and they want to keep money, and that's the way they do it.
I guess my concern would be, if we're going to really talk about defeating ISIS, that we use all means to do that. We need to have strong conversations with other countries who may be supporting ISIS and find out why they're doing it, and evaluate what other means we can use to convince them probably to stop supporting those members of ISIS.
Well, it is a very complicated question because obviously religion, people have the right to choose their own religion and their own beliefs, but something that it is not fair is that the use of the religion is against the people.
I'm conflicted on that one. I think the U.S. is supporting. I think Saudi Arabia is split. I think Saudi Arabia doesn't know what to do. So Saudi Arabia needs the U.S. money, and Saudi Arabia is also against the ISIS regime, but it's giving them money. I think Saudi Arabia is in a very, very, very tough position.
Well, we all know that ISIS was created by the U.S. government, so they need to find a way to terminate that group, because honestly, ISIS doesn't represent Islam. Talking about myself as a Muslim, we don't kill people for fun. ISIS is determined to show a bad reputation for Islam, and trust me, that's not even Islam.
Yeah, I'm disappointed in any regime that supports ISIS and stuff like that. So I like to say kind of to limit that support so that we can limit and stop the ISIS movement, really. So yeah, anything that can halt that, definitely I'd support, and I'd ask Congress to do the same.
I don't think we should sponsor it. So if that means taking money away from Saudi Arabia, I would say that was okay.
What is our experts' reaction to America's persistent support for a nation which backs Wahhabism, namely Saudi Arabia?
Well, it's deeply sickening and really destructive with the type of support that America provides. It shows that there is no moral authority that the United States has in its foreign policy. So we see it ends usually in complete destruction, and there is no sustainability in its foreign policy relationships.
Absolutely sickened, because Daesh will not be defeated for one reason. If the Wahhabism stays as it is, as important pillar of the Saudi regime, because Daesh and Wahhabism, they branched out from one source. So if you look now to the practice of Daesh, you will see it exactly the same practice of Wahhabism. Therefore, United States cannot talk about Wahhabism or try to convince Saudi Arabia to change the ideology of Wahhabism. This means destabilizing their regime. And of course, Saudi Arabia does not want this. Therefore, the situation will stay like this for a long time to come.
Former US Ambassador to Syria, Robert Ford, says Saudi Arabia's promotion of Wahhabism helps recruitment to ISIL. Who is to blame in the US for ISIL recruitment? The public said this.
Oh, I don't know. It's hard to really pinpoint one particular entity, organization. Clearly we know that ISIS is a problem across the world. We know that the entire world community needs to come together to support efforts to reduce persons who are going to be killing people just because they don't agree with their particular form of religion. So I think we talk about Americans here who go and join the fight is of concern, of course, to us and other persons across the world.
I think U.S. interventionism abroad, in the Middle East particularly, has a lot to do with recruitment to all kinds of extremist groups. Whenever the U.S. intervenes in another country's internal affairs, for whatever reasons, be they justified or not, it's going to create a lot of backlash, which is going to pave the way for disenfranchised young people in particular to align with groups that promise to do harm to the United States.
You can't really blame anyone in the U.S. for ISIS recruitment. People are going to seek out their own battles, and if ISIS is open to taking Americans and taking people from other countries and making it feasible for them to do, it's going to happen. We can't say, you know, somebody here is responsible. That just doesn't make sense.
I blame the war in Iraq.
I don't know who to blame in the US for that. Obviously, where government money goes to operations that do fund or in some way inhibit the ISIS movement. So anywhere that does inhibit that kind of movement, then that's to blame. The Pacifics, I'm not too sure of who that would be.
Those are the public's views. We asked our experts to assess where the blame in America lies for ISIL recruitment.
As it's well known, there are various entities in the United States that drive forward other groups, other forces, other movements in other parts of the world. For example, obviously in Syria, in Iraq, we see the movement of Daesh, where there is a lot of terrorist activity being funded and providing military support and financial support by the United States. In Ukraine, we see the fascist movement being funded and politically supported by the United States. These all have to be stopped, and there really is no justification for these types of supporting movements.
Well, of course, in this case, logically you blame the United States, because the United States does not ask Saudi Arabia to change Wahhabism ideology. And Daesh is part or from the same ideology of Wahhabism. Saudi Arabia recruits Daesh because it is the same ideology. And the United States is silent on this. Of course, in this case, you would say that that United States allow Saudi Arabia to recruit all these killers and Takfiris.
Michael Morell, the former acting director of the CIA, has called for a discussion with the Saudis over their support for Wahhabism. But why hasn't the US said or done anything about this in nearly 100 years? Is the public's opinion.
I don't know. That's a good question. All these are good questions. So I think, again, we clearly know that ISIS is a problem. We need to make sure that countries that are supporting ISIS understand that if we are to defeat ISIS, those countries need to withdraw the support of ISIS. We need to find ways to train our troops and also train the troops in these other countries so that we can eradicate this awful institution that, again, is causing young men and women to go out and do violent things.
I have no idea.
I think that there are also ways that they can be talking and convincing, and they have to really look for more openness on the Saudi Arabia so that they can also change on this.
I have no idea.
Well, it's money. It has to do with money. If they go and tell them, hey, you did something bad, trust me, they're going to be abducting some budget away from the U.S. And trust me, the U.S. are not looking forward to losing one of their allies, which is has a higher percentage of oil, and that's their main access. So I think that's one of the best reasons they're not reaching to that level.
I guess, yeah, the international community led by America does need to do more to limit that. Why they haven't, it's a bit disappointing. I mean, America is definitely a global power, so they should have more say in limiting such things like that. So I definitely would support more discussions on that and more forceful action instead of just kind of slow movement like you said over the 100 years.
U.S. geopolitics being so tied to its international oil dependency, that's always been the first line issue, and everything other than that has taken second stage.
Our experts clarified why they believe America has remained silent about Saudi Arabia's backing for Wahhabism across a period spanning almost a century.
The United States government policy has behaved in a way that there has been no justification for economic, political, or any form of peaceful prosperity with the countries that it deals with. So ultimately, it's whatever is in its own interest, that's how it will behave. So whether it's Daesh, whether it's Al-Nusra Front, whether it's Al-Qaeda, that incidentally is being supported by US mercenary groups in Yemen. And recently, of course, they've had one of their commanders killed in Yemen.
United States prefer to have cheap oil and send arms or sells arms to Saudi Arabia with billions of pounds rather than to discuss the ideology of Wahhabism. United States knows that Wahhabism is a dangerous ideology. It creates Daesh, but it prefers to have a materialistic benefit rather than to change Wahhabism.
Analysts say that Saudi Arabia's growing international isolation and Iran's rising regional influence will arrest the growth of ISIL. Who should be thanked for this development? We ask the public.
I don't know. I think when we talk about the entire world community coming together and proposing solutions to reduce ISIS influence in individual countries, you talk about England's attempts, France attempts, United States attempts to reduce numbers of persons who are going to join ISIS. This is how we reduce their numbers, and so we all can take some bit of credit for reducing their influence across the world and in individual countries also.
Well, any better relations with Iran, we should thank Barack Obama.
Well, I debate the premise a little bit. Just until recently, Iran was incredibly isolated due to U.S. and European sanctions. So if Iran is gaining prominence in the region, that's something we've yet to see, except for perhaps in the past couple of weeks.
I think that the push on regional changes have to come from there. The U.S. obviously have to help, but the other countries, all the Arab countries, the more moderate Arab countries in the region should also push and try to convince Saudi Arabia on getting something much better for the region and not be so extremist. And this fight between the different sects of Arabs and Muslims and things like that is not helping anyone. It's just helping these extremists that are killing just innocent people.
The people, because finally they speak up. And trust me, back in the days, I mean, I remember people couldn't speak. If you speak, something will happen to you or happens to your family. But right now, everyone is speaking up, and I'm grateful that everyone is standing up for their rights. And hopefully would lead us to peace.
I think it should be led by the Middle Eastern economies and stuff like that, and US should definitely have a positive influence over that whole area. I definitely think any cultures that prohibit terrorism and kind of atrocities or human rights abuses should be thanked for that. Countries that do exhibit democratic rights and stuff.
I think the people in Iran, because they've been through, a lot in the last 10 years, anybody that's promoting peace is I mean, I'm sure there are people in Saudi Arabia that promote peace. Everybody in America is not promoting the same cause, you know, and we're all not fighting the same cause. So you pick and choose your battles, and I just don't think that it's really fair to say that, you know, one person is responsible for good and one person is responsible for bad. There's good and bad everywhere.
In the final analysis, who really deserves credit for driving back the expansion of ISIL? We invited our experts to give their assessment of the facts.
Russian airstrikes have prevented from Daesh and other terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in Syria, Iraq, to bring their objective forward, spread the Wahhabi aggression in the region. Now, having said that, there's been great advances by the Syrian military with Iraq's help, with Iranian support largely, that have pushed these terrorists back.
I must say, Saudi Arabia always tries to weaken Iran, to isolate Iran. And we have a good example of that. It flooded last year, flooded the market with oil, and the oil is very cheap now. One of the reasons is to weaken Iran, but fortunately that Iran now first is richer than before with the money she got, and also stronger. And Saudi Arabia, in fact, is weak and is going to be weak, and particularly if continues with this war in Yemen, which will not at all win. This is why now Saudi Arabia is struggling, whereas Iran now is open to the whole world. Everyone in Europe now asked to do business with Iran. So Iran is becoming stronger, Saudi Arabia is becoming isolated all the time.
The United States has had a strong partnership with Saudi Arabia for decades, despite the regime's promotion of the extremist Wahhabi ideology, the very same ideology that underpins ISIL. Yet America refuses to do anything about it. As long as Washington is seen to support a regime that reflects the very same values as ISIL, it is hard to see how the United States can credibly claim it is seriously engaged in a war against ISIL.